Hi everyone, it's Ryan. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a pecan pie because we are getting ready for Thanksgiving. All right, to start off with, I have 1 1/3 cup of pecans that I have just chopped up pretty finely. You can see there are still some good sized chunks in here, and that is okay. So I'm actually going to go ahead and toast these in the oven for like 10 to 15 minutes just to get a little added flavor. I know they will kind of rise on the pie and toast in the oven, but I like to do this ahead of time too, just so it adds a little bit. So I'm going to get these in the oven. It's at 350. And like I said, I'm going to do that for 10 to 15 minutes. Now I'm going to get started on the pie crust. And for this pie crust, I'm using butter. So I have 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter here. And I am going to go ahead and cube this up. And you want to make sure that it's cold so that it doesn't break down too much in your pie crust. And this one has been sitting out a little bit because I was getting everything ready for this video, so it is a little softer than it should be. If that happens, you can go ahead and put it back in your fridge for a little bit. I am not, for the video's sake. So I'm just cutting this just into small little cubes. And then you could do this part of the process in a food processor if you wanted, but like you could add the butter to your flour mixture in a food processor, but I'm going to do it all by hand. So I'm just cutting these into little cubes. Okay, now I might actually go ahead and put this in the fridge to sit while I get the rest of the stuff together because it is definitely a little warmer than it should be. Okay, so I have just a shallow bowl here. It's decent size because you want to be able to work without throwing flour all over your counter. And I am going to add 2 cups of all-purpose flour. All right, and you'll have to bear with me. I do have a bit of a cold at the moment, so my voice is probably a little weird. Okay, so we have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, and then 1 1/2 teaspoons of sugar. I don't normally have my sugar in this kind of container, but I filled my canister and needed to put it somewhere else. So I'm just going to give that a little toss with my hand just to mix everything in so you don't get a clump of flour somewhere or a clump of sugar. So now I'm going to go and get the butter out of the fridge that I just put in there because, like I said, you want it to be as cold as possible. Okay, so I'm going to dump all of the butter into the flour mixture. And I like to just kind of toss the little cubes around and kind of break them up. Make sure you have flour on your fingers and it won't stick to you as bad. Just breaking everything up. And then just kind of go in with your hands and start squeezing, kind of running the butter through your hand. That way you're getting, this is going to help with the flakiness of your pie crust. You're getting the butter nice and broken down, but not too much. You still want to have some decent sized bits in here. Just keep running it through your fingers. And if you used salted butter here, which you absolutely could, just decrease the amount of salt that you add in. All right, we're getting there. You can see I still have a few decent sized chunks of butter. I'm just trying to break them down. Okay, so this is how I like for it to look. You can see there's little bits of butter, but then there's also some smaller chunks. So we're going to stop there with this part. Yes, I know I should wash my hands before I do this, but I'm not going to. So now I'm going to add a little bit of vinegar. This is also going to help when you're baking your crust. The vinegar is going to evaporate and make flaky layers. And then I have 1/3 of a cup of cold water. You want your water, just like the butter, you want it to be cold. And I'm not going to add all of the water because depending on where you are and the humidity, it might not take all of that water for your pie crust. So go in there, and you don't want to overmix. Just kind of do the same thing where you're squeezing it together. You want it to come together, but you don't want it to be a super wet dough. You can see I still have some dry crumbles on the bottom, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more water. All right, this is good. Let me get all these bits off my hand. And then what I like to do, I am making one pie crust with this. And this, if you were going to do a pie with a top and a bottom, you would need to do 2 of this. But because I'm only doing a pecan pie, which only has crust on the bottom, I'm just doing this. And this honestly would maybe do 1.5 pies. So I like to go ahead and kind of form it into a ring or a circle so that whenever it's time for me to roll it out, I don't have to do that much work shaping it into a circle. My timer is about to go off for the pecans, so I'm going to check those and I'll be right back. All right, so the pecans were not quite done, so I set them for another 5 minutes. So that will be a total of 15 minutes. Now I am going to take plastic wrap and I'm going to wrap this crust and put it in the fridge for at least an hour before I roll it out. That way it gives the butter time to harden back up and it won't be so difficult to mess with. And there we go. I'm going to put this in the fridge and then we're going to work on the filling. I just pulled the pecans out of the oven. So they were in for a total of 15 minutes. So I'm going to set them behind us so they can cool down while we make the filling. All right, for the pecan pie filling, we have, of course, the pecans that are behind me. We have the light corn syrup, butter that is melted, and I just melted it in the microwave, so it's sitting here cooling down a little bit. Eggs, brown sugar, regular sugar, vanilla, and salt. So to start out with, we're going to add to a bowl a 1/4 cup of packed brown sugar, 1 cup of regular sugar, and then 1 cup of light corn syrup. Ugh. Struggling to open this morning. So 1 cup. I always hate measuring this because it makes such a mess. Do. Looks like it's going to be most of what I had left in this container, this bottle. I'm going to dump that and let a little bit more go in. And I always used a regular whisk for this and almost broke my whisk every time. And I just recently got one of these dough whisks. So I'm going to give it a try today and see how well it works for this. Make sure you get all of the corn syrup out of there. Super sticky. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a little bit of a mix just to get all the sugars combined. And this thing works really well for this part. I'm going to crack my eggs into this other bowl so that I can whisk them up a little bit before I actually, oh, that went all over me, before I add them to this, because I just like to do that so that the yolks get all smashed up. Okay, so I'm just going to whisk these up real quick with a fork. Oh, that was terrible noise. Okay, now I'm going to add in my eggs. Give that a good mix. Why do I not have the handle? There we go. Using the bowl the way it was meant to be used. Okay, now I'm going to add my melted. This is 1/3 cup of melted unsalted butter. And then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And then a 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. I'm going to give this another mix. Now you could switch to a regular whisk if you wanted to. I already have this one dirty. It's just a little bit of a thinner mixture here. All right. So now we are ready to roll out the pie dough, which I might have to let sit in the fridge for a little bit longer. And then we will get it filled and get it in the oven. Okay, so the pie filling is ready. I have my pie dish here, and this is a fairly deep one, so you will see just how much this pie shell will hold. And I have my pecans over here ready. Now if I can find the end, there it is. Going to roll this pie crust out, and it is still soft. It's not super hard. If you did this and left it in your fridge overnight, you might want to leave it out on your counter for just a little bit to soften up just a touch so that it's a little bit easier to work with. And I just have some all-purpose flour over here. Whatever kind of flour you use in your pastry or whatever you're making is the kind of flour that you want to use to roll that pastry out. So like cookie dough, you want to use all-purpose. So I am getting a very generous amount of flour on here. If it's too much at the end, you can take like a pastry brush or something and brush some of it off. And I'm just applying even pressure all the way around because I like to keep it in the circle shape. So you'll see that I'm kind of rotating the rolling pin as I go, and it's keeping that round shape. And like I said, this is a large amount of dough for a pie crust. So if you roll it super thin or you don't want a very thick crust, you might want to maybe take some of this away before you start rolling. That way you don't have to roll out as much. and you won't have to cut off as much either. So over here you can see it's starting to stick to my rolling pin. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more flour. Just keep rolling it out until you get it to the thickness that you want. I don't know about some of you, but the crust is sometimes my favorite part of a pie. I know that might be crazy to say, but it's the truth. I love pie crust. And actually, growing up a lot, whatever pie crust my mom would cut off the edge, we would roll that up or roll that onto a sheet pan, put some melted butter on it, and then add cinnamon and sugar and bake it off. And we would have pie crust with cinnamon and sugar on it. It was so good. I actually still do that whenever I make pies around the house. We'll see today because I have a few pies that I'm trying to make today. So I might save my extra crust. I know a lot of people will say that you're not supposed to re-roll pie crust, but I'm not a firm believer in that. Do what you gotta do. Okay, this is still a little thick, but I think this is good for me. If you didn't want your pie crust this thick, keep rolling, or like I said, take some away before you start rolling. Okay, so I'm just going to see over here. Sorry, like I said, I have a cold, so I'm getting out of breath. Over here, you have a little bit of a crack, so make sure you hold on to that. Treat it a little nicer than the rest of the crust. Fold it in half, and then we're going to just put this down in our pie pan. And make sure you're not just pressing down. Lift the side as you press the pie dough down into your pan. That way it doesn't tear. And you're just getting this down in there so that you can form your edges. Okay, it's down in there pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and get a little knife. And I'm going to go around the edge, and I'm going to leave. I'm basically using my finger as a guide here. I'm cutting up to that knuckle all the way around. So my hand is up against the pie pan, and I'm just going around and I'm cutting at that knuckle. That way it's pretty well even all the way around your pie, and you're not dealing with all of this extra crust. And this pie shell, as you saw, let's see if you can see it. Okay. So it does not have a rim on the outside of it. So it is a little tricky with this one. I just like to use it because it's pretty. It is a little trickier with the ones that do not have a rim because sometimes your pie crust can fall down into, like, off the side or down into your pie. So you just have to be a little more careful with how you do your edges. And I will show you how I do mine. And I can roll pie dough all day long at home and be fairly successful at having a good pie come out of it and the sides not falling. But when I do it at work to try to be nice and help out our pie makers by helping them get caught up with crust, I don't know what it is, but my pie crusts always fall at work. So it's gotten to where I don't even like to offer to help because I don't want to do more damage than good. So I like to work on this side, but for the video's sake, I will try to show you on this side what I'm doing. I'm taking the pie dough up, folding it to where it goes just down below the top, and I'm pressing against it to kind of create sort of a seal right there so that it doesn't fall. And right here, we have a crack. Just do the same thing. We'll worry about the crack whenever we go to crimp the edges. Should have put something underneath this pie pan so it didn't make this noise for you, but it is what it is. So I'm just pressing all the way around. Almost, there we are. Okay, so now I'm just gonna go all the way around and just kind of push on it and make sure that the crust is sticking. Over here, it wasn't quite below the rim, so I'm just making sure everywhere we get below that rim, and right here, it's starting to fall a little bit already. So I just want to push it up against the side. Okay, now what I like to do for the edges is I like to take these two fingers and then a knuckle and just kind of pinch it. And I do that all the way around. And I'm pressing pretty hard and pinching my fingers because I want those two parts of the dough to stick together. Again, trying to help the pie dough not fall, or the pie crust not to fall. You're going to all this work for your pie, so you want it to look as good as possible in the end. When you come to the end, sometimes it does not match up evenly. It is what it is. Deal with it or go back through and try to make it perfect. So then for these parts, I do the same thing, only a little gentler because I don't want anything to fall. And I'm just pinching. Right there was that crack, and you would never know now. So just go all the way around. If you see any spot where you think it might be a little too thin or it might fall, just babysit it a little. Give it a little extra care there and keep going. And I do have my oven still preheated to 350. I'm just going to go around and make sure that we are pressed against the side everywhere. So 350 for the oven. And now I'm going to add my 1 3/4 cup toasted chopped pecans to the bottom. I like to get it in a fairly even layer. And now I'm going to take the filling. That's been sitting for a little bit, so I'm just going to give it a quick stir to make sure none of the sugars have settled. Give it a good stir, and then we're going to pour this just directly over. And it's okay if the pecans move. They're going to come to the top anyway. Get all of that goodness in there. And you can see, because this is such a deep pie pan, that I could have done a little bit more filling. But that's okay. We're just going to have a little bit of extra crispy crust. So now I am going to get a piece of foil. Okay, so I am just going to put this in the oven and then place a piece of foil over it and cook it with the foil on it for 35 minutes. And then I'm going to take the foil off and cook it for an additional 35 to 45 minutes. And I will come back and show you what it should look like in the oven, because you want it to have a little bit of a jiggle, but you want the pie to be set. You don't want that custard to be runny whenever you get done. All right, I will come back and show you that. And one more thing, I'm going to put this in the oven on a cookie sheet. I don't like to put a pie directly in the oven if I have the space. I like to put it on a pie pan so that I'm not, when I'm trying to pull it out, my hand or the oven mitt isn't hitting the pie crust. Okay, so just a little trick to make sure that all this hard work that you did to get this pie crust looking so nice doesn't get wasted if you hit it with an oven mitt. All right, I just pulled this out of the oven. It did end up taking, I think because this is a deeper pie, it took about an hour and a half in the oven. And it does, I'll try to see if you can see, it does jiggle just a little bit, but it is set. So if you have a shallower pan, it will likely take, I would say, potentially an hour-ish. So there you go. And this, you can see that my crust did fall down into the shell or into the pie pan just a little bit around the edges, but it still held all of that filling in. So I am going to make the rest of my pies for the day. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks. Bye.